What was this place like in the beginning? Tell me how it used to be. That is a question I asked as part of my Year 9 school project. Part of our history curriculum was focused on local history. In this case, it was the history of Noble Park in Melbourne's southeast. There had been a research component, hitting up the Springvale Council offices to get whatever printed info we could find, locating what we could from our very limited school library. Unsurprisingly, there wasn't all that much printed info on hand. Noble Park was just a small suburb of Melbourne, a small part of a relatively small municipality. And being in the year 1989, Google wasn't a thing. There had been the classroom component. In that setting, I learned that in 1909, a landowner named Alan Buckley gave the name Noble Park or Nobel Park to his land division in honour of the inventor Alfred Nobel. Because as a salesman, he used to use the land to demonstrate Nobel's explosives. If you want to know where potholes come from in Melbourne, maybe. Our teacher had no real connection to the place. She wasn't born in Australia. She was a great history teacher, but she didn't live anywhere near the suburb. She gave a few of these little factoids because they were written in the curriculum, but they really didn't help us connect with the suburb's story. Fortunately, the other part, the bit that actually added weight to all the written work, the most helpful part of the research was to find someone with significant tenure in the town and ask them about the early days and their reflections on how things changed. I lived in a home in Vincent Crescent built in the 1940s. None of that affects my passwords. You can get out there. My project source was an elderly neighbour whose home had been built well before mine had been. She and her husband built the third house on the street. She actually knew Alan Buckley. And her story connected me so much closer to the 1909 origin story than any other part of my work. So, what was this place like in the beginning? What was Noble Park like in the beginning? Tell me how it used to be. The council had a view that was very much removed from the origin story. My school had a view somewhat removed also. But my neighbour had a story to tell. And it grounded me in my neighbourhood more than any of the other things because it was from lived experience, closest to the source. Now, I want you to imagine a very big group of people in an ancient time in the Near East asking a similar question. I'm speaking, of course, of the ancient Jews under the instruction of Moses. The question of, tell me how it used to be, was a deeply important one. They had people around them with an arguably removed view of this. In Egypt, where they'd recently escaped, there were mythological epics written to try to answer this. On the other side of their world, in Mesopotamia, the first days of Babylon, there were other similar epics, all speaking of creation and key events through the lens of their pagan worldviews. Those views were built around a polytheistic lens. And because it was a human story, not a real one, there was a lot of very human behaviour, a lot of infighting between the deities. Creation was often depicted as being caught in their crossfire. And besides initial creation and their own petty differences, there was at times a bit of seemingly aloof behavior from them. Again, a man-made religious system is one where it's convenient for a deity to remain distant. But for the Jews still wandering in the wilderness, the proven behavior of their God was distinctly different. They knew through their experience that their God was more involved than the Egyptians and other pagans thought. They knew their God spoke and acted for them. They wanted to know more about this God so that they and those after them could follow him with all their heart. And Moses understood his mandate was to ensure the people of Israel knew this truth. What was this place like in the beginning, Moses? Tell us how it used to be. Well, let's begin our 11-part sermon series. In the Beginning is our working title. And today we're going to look at very broad strokes at Genesis chapter 1. We're going to read through it today. If you want to follow in your Bible, you can turn to page 1 of your Bible and you're there. And let us work through this in some... You could almost... This is one of those ones you could preach for a year. But I won't. And it won't take me a year today either. Let's begin at verse 1 here. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Keep your thumb in there. Don't worry, I've got a short intro. Then we'll get a big piece to look at after that. Let's just look at this. The word beginning, though, we've got some questions about this. The language kind of gives the indicator that it's not easy to simply define the exact time Moses is writing about. The certain thing we can take from this is that we can't take this to mean the very beginning of all of God's activities. Because an eternal God has no beginning. So we have eternity before something happens. The beginning must refer to the start of a particular time frame. Just as the Bible tells us that there is an end, the eschaton. When the time of the end comes, doesn't mean eternity is finished. It means what we know in the human story ends and an eternal story continues. Either side of this story, there is eternity. From beginning to end, there is eternity either side of that. In the beginning must refer to the beginning of God's active work on the earth and the formation of things which lead us to life as we know it. It's a bit like my question to my elderly neighbour. I asked her, how was it in the earliest time? Tell me how it was. And the context of that question would be taken to mean on or soon after 1909. I'm not asking her to go back to Federation a little before that. I'm not asking to go to 1788. I'm not going to go back into England's origins or any of that sort of stuff. I'm actually just asking about the beginning of the context we were talking about. In a similar way, the biblical beginning is to be taken as a specific time. Most likely the dawn of the human story. So the Jews may well be asking, hey Moses, how were things at the beginning of humanity? The wording in verse 1 appears to indicate there's a planet already in play before this takes place. How was this? in the very beginning? Well, all we're told by Moses is that it's formless. It's void in some way or another. The creationist might understand this to be the state completely void of life. The modern scientist might use the word evolving to describe this segment of history. But Moses isn't defending either of these views. He isn't writing to Charles Darwin or correcting anyone in the Enlightenment period. He was instructing Jews who were still on their way to the Promised Land, still learning about the character and the work of their one true God. For the Near Eastern mind Moses is writing to, no matter what has happened up to this point, a poetically void and formless earth is described. And this tells us that it simply has no clear function or purpose. But for life to be present, Israel's God must surely have played a role. And he most certainly had a purpose in mind for what he had made. That is the understanding of the deities at the time. Here is part of what these people had been previously told through outside voices. That's apparently creation. That's the world. The big arching person there is the sky goddess, Nut. Stars appear all over her body, so she's kind of like the galaxy arching over the earth. There's a little disc, which is the earth. The guy under her with hands raised is said to be the god of the air and wind, Shu. The dude lying at the bottom is Geb. You know, it's like kind of looking like this. That is the earth god. In this mythology, Shu, the guy with his hands raised in the middle, is the father of Nut and Geb. In this worldview, all change in the world will be attributed to either human activity or the gods, and there will be reasons for these things. The Jews escaping Egypt were wanting to know and be instructed about the God that they would follow, and what these gods, this God or these gods, expected of them. But verse 1 tells Israel that there is only one God. He is named in this verse as Elohim, a word said to be plural. Plural in majesty and intensity, to denote the fullness of deity that God is. It's not a plurality of gods like the pagans believed, but one very intense and all-powerful God. He alone creates the heavens and the earth. No shared glory, no shared credit. No collaboration, no competition between various deities. And he is a creator at close quarters with that which he creates. The Spirit of God. The Hebrew can use the word spirit and wind interchangeably with the same word. The breath or the wind of God moves across an initially purposeless earth. In the beginning, the absence of purpose makes for a dark and chaotic place. But the character of God is to bring order out of the chaotic places. And if you know your anatomy, you'll know this to be true. The breath, the ability to breathe, creates room for a voice. If you can't breathe, you can't speak. But the breath of God leads to a creative voice. Now we read the bulk of the passage. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water." So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it. And it was so. God called the vault sky. And there was evening and there was morning, the second day. God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place and let dry ground appear." And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants, trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds." And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. God said, "Let there be lights on the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years, and let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth." And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. There was evening, there was morning, the fourth day. And God said, "Let water teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky." So God created the great creatures of the sea and every living thing with which the water teems and that moves about in it, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the water in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth." And there was evening, there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, "Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds. The livestock, the creatures that move along the ground, the wild animals, each according to its kind." And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God said it was so. And God saw that it was good. I've jumped ahead. And God saw that it was good, is how this line finishes. Let's tap into a couple of things here just to understand what we're reading. Moses is not setting out to write a science document. And it shows with some of the orders of things here. Vegetation before light feels like one case in point. He is using poetry to present his ideas here. And hopefully you notice that in things that were being repeated. And God said, "And it was so, and it was good." The evening and the morning was the blank day. Choosing to tell this in a poetic fashion would have an important reason. Imagine, let me ask you, how did you learn the alphabet? By singing a song, right? A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Even now, when I go, what's the 15th letter of the alphabet? I have to go, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. I have to work that through. I can't just name it off the top of my head. And probably neither can, if we're all pressed, we might have struggles with that too, right? How do we all learn our phone number? I learned it in sing-song fashion. 5, 5, 8, 5, 9, 8, 5. I had to go the high range and down again. We learn things in song fashion so that it helped call it to memory and stick with us. Not everyone could read. Learning was mainly through oral tradition. So these things will be taught and repeated around tables and gatherings. They would use poetry and song to help lodge these things into the collective memory of the people. It wasn't one person holding all the cards and having a top-down instruction fest. It was everybody knowing the story together as it was told through oral tradition. Moses is using tropes often associated with the mythological writing that occurred all around them. He's using that style of writing, not saying that Genesis is a myth. It most certainly isn't. The work of the Egyptians and the early Babylonians were clearly myth. It was man-made stuff trying to surmise the gods. Genesis is true theology due to the subject and experience associated with the pages. But many of the tropes were used because that's what the people of Israel were used to hearing. So all of this creation work is not being told in order to denote a strict order of things, but to demonstrate the authority of the one true God. In ancient Near East thinking, only the gods had authority to name things and assign roles and functions of things. And Moses is offering the thesis here that one true God has exclusive authority and sovereignty. Only God, only our God, can bring order out of the chaos. Only He can call for light in the darkness. Only He can utter the words for this to occur. Only He can calm the chaotic spaces, separating the waters of the earth. Jesus demonstrates His own deity, doing the same thing in front of His disciples, calming the storms. Only our God can create life, vegetation, animals, humankind. The lights in the sky are distinctly created things, not deities in and of themselves. People were worshipping the sun, and Moses is going, no, God made the sun. Nothing in creation can claim or represent the deity, for it is all the work of one creator, God. Only He can create the means for time to exist. The day, the night, the seasons, the months, the years. Only He can establish life and sustain it. And He commands these things to be productive, to increase. The one sovereign God has created it all and gives each created thing its function. He hovered over the void earth and with His word created all things and caused the earth to have order and purpose. All of creation, as I've said before, as I've learned recently, is all creation is essentially unnecessary. It only exists because of the will of God. God doesn't need it to exist, but He wills it to exist. Then, within 24 literal hours, or through some other ordained time frame, He brings the human story into this created order. God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in His own image. In the image of God, He created them. Male and female, He created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit and seed within it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth and all the birds in the sky and the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. So God speaks initially here using the word us. Perhaps this captures a bit of the idea of Elohim being a plural word, maybe. Perhaps this conveys the Creator in a form of dialogue, at least with his spirit. In the words of some, it is said to possibly simply be God conveying his ideas with those in his heavenly presence, something the early Hebrews may have been okay with given the mythology of the surrounding lands. However, the Trinitarian in me feels more drawn to an early indicator of the Godhead in collaboration here. What has been described as the divine dance, the fellowship of the Trinity working in unison and yielding and creation coming out of that fellowship. On day 6, Elohim makes mankind in his image. We are distinct from the rest of creation. We have a special function on the now ordered earth. In a more traditional view, humankind shows God's values on the earth by being able to convey his ethical and moral outlook across the world. In the minds of some, being made in God's image speaks of God's character being reflected in a special part of his creation. The order he established is maintained through the agents that he has created and authorized, deputized to do so. In the ancient pagan world, this was perhaps only something a king might have power to do. But the creation story of God's people tells us that all of humanity was initially created with this purpose. We were given the mandate to rule over God's creation, over his world, over the things and the order that he established. That is not a carte blanche thing to go rape and pillage. It means steward. In more recent times, others have taken time to go over the ancient grammar and offer some extra insight. They suggest that this phrase could be translated as, "Let us make man as our image." One of the ways we are reminded that Australia is a Commonwealth nation is the statues of English kings and queens all around the place that come up. This is Queen Victoria in Melbourne's Parliament House. Sad point, the guy that actually did this sculpture he realised he'd done one little detail wrong and met an ugly demise as a result. In the way a king's statue demonstrates the king's rule, in some way, humankind being present is to serve as evidence of God's universal rule on the earth. Now, there's value in both of these perspectives. They both highlight the unique nature of mankind. And they give purpose to mankind to reflect the image of God in the ordered earth he has created. At this very early stage, we are told that they can procreate, to increase in number, They are to fill the earth, to be present all across it. And they are given the mandate, as I've said already, to be faithful stewards of what God has made. How was it in the beginning? Well, it was like this. Mankind had a purpose. Are we living up to that today? Let me offer just some thoughts to conclude here today. I did say I was going to go with broad strokes on this because we kind of need to. There's 11 chapters, 11 weeks. We want to use this as a time to help you understand some of the Genesis story in your own reading. I know some of our house churches have been digging into these chapters in recent weeks. So hopefully this will give some guidelines for that. Question 1, how do you live with purpose? So many of us get caught up in this, and we will seek mentors and coaches and life coaches and self-help books and all these other things trying to find our purpose. And so much of that is done through humanistic mindsets. Oh, I'm just trying to find my place in this world, trying to find my purpose. Your purpose is to reflect God's image in the world. Your purpose is to follow the function assigned to you by God first. Jesus said, seek first the kingdom of God. Seek his rule. Seek his righteousness. And then all the other things get added. Our purpose is found first and foremost in God's plan for our life. And that is shown, at least in part, by the initial mandate he made for us to actually be image bearers of his glory and his character and his will and his rule on the earth. To be stewards of the order that he has established, to be a voice and a mouthpiece of those things in our world. When you're looking for purpose, trying to be coached through that stuff, it needs to be including that sort of expression. Individual efforts and achievements and ambition is actually not in the mind of the ancient Hebrews. That's actually seen as disruption to community. The good of the whole is always on the mind of the ancient Near East that Moses is writing to. And your purpose has the good of others attached to it. How do you live with purpose? What does ruling over creation look like for you? Okay, we can get a little bit silly and lefty and all sorts of stuff here, but it is a real question. We are stewards of what God has created. Are we playing our honest part in that? How does being an image bearer call you to live? If we take that statue idea, then that calls us to understand that our very presence is evidence of God's rule in a place. How are we demonstrating it? How do people look to us and go, I see God's rule through you? How are we demonstrating the character and the heart and the nature and the will of God through the way we live? And how is that calling you to regard others? Apparently, there's another thing we could have been doing on a Sunday, going by this in my letterbox. Who got this? The nationwide mass migration march against things. In my letterbox this week. In my Indian neighbours' letterbox this week, and it names them as part of the problem. In our Karen brothers and sisters' letterboxes this week. In our Congolese brothers and sisters' neighbours this week. This is about individual ambition and glory. This has nothing to do with expressing Imago Dei, being in the image of God. If you're on YouTube watching this because you went there, well, I'll pray for you. But that is not how we are to see humanity. We need to look for God's plans and purposes. Ultimately, he moves nations and establishes orders and raises up leaders. He is closer involved than the pagans think. He's across this, even more so than any human force is. We cannot be part of the fear-mongering. Instead, we need to show the world what loving our neighbour means. In 10 years' time, a significant portion of Australia's churches are going to be very, very, very increasingly so much more multicultural than they presently are. The nations are bringing their faith with them to our country, and that is to our enrichment. What will showing God's rule on the world, on the earth, look like as we collaborate and love them and join with them instead of fighting against them through silly, hollow agendas? We are called to be image bearers and to regard other humans as image bearers also. You're on sacred ground when you start to share your faith with those around you, to demonstrate the rule of God, to let others come under that if they're not already there. Let us be stewards of order, not fear. Let us be stewards of the good of humanity, not the disruption. Let us be agents of the character of the one true God. Let's stop. Let's pray.